underlying unspoken expectation of just, well, suffering.
Oh, absolutely. It's that classic right stuff mentality, You have to be willing to endure immense physical punishment just to earn the view.
Right, because you picture the cramped, terrifying, high G-force reality of traditional rocket capsules. You imagine these peak fitness, military-trained astronauts essentially strapping themselves to the top of a giant controlled explosion.
Yeah, you're crammed into a tiny metal cone.
Exactly. Getting shaken to your absolute core, pulling extreme Gs, wearing a diaper, and just hoping you survive the trip. I mean, it's a purely utilitarian ordeal.
Which, to be fair, was a necessity of the era. I mean, the historical paradigm of spaceflight has always been an endurance test because every single ounce of engineering was dedicated just to escaping gravity.
Right.
The human being was almost an afterthought. You weren't a passenger, really. You were just highly fragile cargo inside an incredibly violent machine.
But imagine, just for a second, completely wiping that slate clean. Like, imagine walking out of your front door, and instead of boarding a bus to a launch pad, you step into what looks like a luxury zero-gravity Airstream trailer sitting right on a neighborhood landing pad.
It's a wild image.
Right. Picture a high-end 360-degree radio lounge. We're talking panoramic windows, floating modular furniture, acoustic dampening so quiet you can literally hear a pin drop.
Yeah.
Imagine taking your entire family, kids, grandparents, everyone on a 2-week orbital vacation without anyone needing a military background or a centrifuge test or, peak physical conditioning.
It completely reframes the entire human relationship with the cosmos. I mean, the engineering documents we were looking at today represent a massive leap from merely surviving the hostile environment of space to actually residing in it comfortably. It's really the domestication of spaceflight.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because we are staring at a massive stack of blueprints, fluid dynamics reports, and FAA regulatory filings that all point to one incredibly audacious goal. It's called the SEVCO SPHERE.
Yeah, the sphere.
And our mission today is to figure out how this company plans to take a completely reimagined spherical aerospace vehicle, turn it into the ultimate family-friendly habitat, and fly it from a terrestrial driveway all the way into deep space.
And the source material mapping this out is just incredibly dense. What's fascinating here is the sheer breadth of disciplines having to cooperate. We aren't just looking at one piece of the puzzle here.
No, not at all.
We are synthesizing highly technical engineering roadmaps for multi-domain spherical spacecraft, the actual product requirements, documents the PRDs for the vehicle itself, plus these deep psychological UX architecture reports on a system they call radial vision.
Which is mind-blowing stuff, by the way.
Oh, completely. And it also includes market analysis on high-net-worth space tourism, advanced radiation shielding research, and even the legal frameworks. It's just a massive convergence of problems being solved simultaneously.
So, if you're listening to this, whether you are an aerospace engineer, someone obsessed with the new space race, or just someone who looks up at the night sky and wonders when it's your turn to go stick around. Because this deep dive is going to completely dismantle how you think about rockets, aerodynamics, and the commercialization of the great beyond.
Definitely.
The blueprints are right here on the table, so, where do we even begin with something this massive? It feels like building a flying luxury hotel from scratch is an impossible first step.
Well, it would be, which is exactly why their business strategy is highly phased. If you look at the SEVCO SPHERE's primary PRD, they lay out a 3-phase roadmap.
Okay.
They are treating this much more like a luxury automotive rollout or a new line of private jets rather than a monolithic NASA program.
So break down phase 1 for me, because if I'm a startup, I can't just build an interstellar spaceship on day 1.
No, you really can't. Phase 1 is strictly about orbital recreation, and it relies heavily on outsourcing the absolute hardest part of spaceflight, which is getting off the ground.
Makes sense.
In this initial phase, SEVCO isn't building a booster rocket at all. The Sphere is designed to act as a highly advanced, ultra-luxurious payload that just rides inside the fairing of an existing heavy-lift vehicle, like the SpaceX Starship.
Oh, I see. So SpaceX does the heavy lifting, literally.
Exactly.
They shoot the Sphere into orbit, drop it off, and then the Sphere just kind of hangs out in low Earth orbit.
That's the idea. It functions as an autonomous orbital hotel suite. A family could spend 2 weeks up there testing out the life support, the recreational systems, the whole user interface.
Like a shakedown cruise.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It allows SEVCO to prove that the habitat portion of the vehicle works perfectly before they even attempt to tackle propulsion.
Which makes total sense from a business perspective. But phase 2 is where I was reading the documents and had to just stop and rub my eyes, because phase 2 abandons the SpaceX ride entirely.
Yes. Phase 2 introduces total autonomy. The goal here is independent Earth-to-orbit launch and re-entry.
Which is insane.
That means the sphere takes off on its own, flies to space on its own, and lands on its own. No booster rockets. No launch towers.
Which honestly sounds completely wild. You're talking about a giant metal ball launching itself from a driveway. We will definitely need to dig into the physics of that in a minute, because my brain just rejects the idea of a sphere flying.
Oh, we will get to the physics. It's fascinating.
But before we get to the engines, there's phase 3, right?
Right. Phase 3 is the ultimate endgame, interplanetary and interstellar travel.
Wow.
By that point, the spheres act as scalable, modular habitats. Think of them as individual train cars that can be linked together for deep space missions, like a multifamily expedition to Mars, or even uncrewed probes pushing out of the solar system.
Now, whenever we talk about luxury family space vacations, the skeptic in me immediately asks, like, who is actually paying for this? I mean, developing a completely new type of spacecraft costs billions.
Tens of billions. Easily.
Right. So is there a viable market of people willing to drop a fortune just to float in a fancy room?
Well, the market data suggests the demand is actually overwhelming. We can look at a contemporary analog right in the source stack, a company called Space Perspective. They aren't building orbital rockets, they are building high-altitude balloons.
Oh, right. I've seen mock-ups of this. It's a pressurized capsule called Spaceship Neptune, right? They suspend it under a massive hydrogen balloon.
Yes, exactly. And they're charging $125,000 for a single ticket.
Wow.
It takes 8 passengers and a pilot up to about 100,000 feet, right to the absolute edge of the stratosphere. It's a very gentle 6-hour journey. 2 hours floating up, 2 hours cruising at altitude, and 2 hours descending to a splashdown in the ocean.
The thing that struck me about Spaceship Neptune is that it doesn't look like a spaceship at all. It looks like a high-end cocktail bar in Manhattan.
It really does.
There's no dashboard covered in thousands of switches. There are plush reclining seats. The colors are muted, deep purples and blues, so there's no glare on the windows. They even have a restroom with a massive window so you don't miss the view while you're in there.
Yeah, that design language is very intentional. Space Perspective has explicitly stated they want their customers to be entirely at ease. They don't want you wearing a pressure suit or feeling nervous.
Right, no bulky orange suits.
Exactly. They want you sipping a beverage and having a profound emotional experience as you watch the curvature of the Earth emerge against the black sky.
But is it actually working? Are people actually buying into the cocktail bar in the sky concept?
They have already sold nearly 900 tickets.
You're kidding? 900.
900. That is over $100 million in pre-sales for a vehicle that is essentially a very, very fancy balloon. It proves definitively that the demand for the quintessential astronaut experience, the overview effect, is immense, provided you remove the physical suffering.
So space tourism is pivoting. I mean, it used to be for the adrenaline junkies, the billionaires who wanted to brag that they pulled 4Gs and didn't pass out. Now it's shifting toward affluent families who want a transformative, comfortable retreat.
Exactly. It's what the PRDs call the pioneering family demographic. And targeting them is a brilliant financial maneuver by SEVCO.
Because that's where the money is.
Right. They are looking at the existing, highly lucrative markets for private aviation, super yachts, and luxury RVs, and essentially saying, let's migrate this consumer behavior into low Earth orbit.
That makes a ton of sense.
Wow.
A guy who owns a $50 million Gulfstream jet isn't going to want to sit in a cramped, sweaty tube just to go to space. He wants his Gulfstream experience.
Yes, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, this strategy fundamentally alters the economics of spaceflight. Historically, getting to space has been a taxi service model.
How do you mean?
Well, you pay an institutional provider, whether that's the Russian Space Agency, Blue Origin, or SpaceX, for a brief, tightly controlled ride. You were just renting a seat on their machine.
Right. Here's my money. Take me up. Bring me down.
But SEVCO is proposing an ownership model. In Phase 2, the sphere becomes a personal asset. You own the vehicle.
Just like a yacht.
Yeah. Exactly like a yacht. You maintain it, you dictate the schedule. Yeah. You launch it from a local vertiport when your family is ready. It transforms the industry from a series of one-off, stunt-like events into a repeatable, self-sufficient lifestyle sector.
So phase one is like renting a luxury cabin on a cruise ship where SpaceX is the massive ship carrying you out into the deep ocean. But phase two is like buying your own multi-terrain super RV that can magically just lift off your driveway and fly into orbit.
That is a very accurate way to conceptualize the transition, yeah.
Okay, but this is where I have to throw the brakes on. I get the business model, I get the balloon analogy, but balloons are slow. They are buoyant, they gently float up. Phase two of the SEVCO sphere involves a massive, heavy metal sphere taking off from the ground and violently punching through the Earth's atmosphere to reach orbital velocity.
Yes, it does.
And a sphere doesn't have wings. It doesn't have a pointy nose. It looks like a giant, blunt bowling ball. How does a bowling ball not just rip itself apart from air resistance?
That is the defining engineering hurdle of the entire project. I mean, how do you make a blunt body aerodynamic? If you look at a fighter jet or a traditional rocket, they are slender. They look like darts. They are designed to pierce the air.
Right, because if I stick my hand out the window of a car on the highway, if I hold it flat like a blade, the air just slips by. But if I make a fist, the air slams into it and pushes my arm back. A sphere is just a giant metal fist.
That's a great analogy. The physics term for what you're experiencing is pressure drag. When air hits the front of a blunt object, it has to separate and flow around it.
Okay.
On a sphere at low speeds, the airflow separates from the hull relatively early, right around the equator of the ball. This leaves a massive, chaotic, swirling void of low-pressure air behind the sphere, which is called a wake.
And because the pressure behind the sphere is so low and the pressure hitting the front is so high, the sphere is literally being sucked backward by its own wake.
Exactly. The sphere is fighting the air. At subsonic speeds, a sphere has a highly inefficient drag coefficient of about 0.47. For context, a modern sports car is usually around 0.25.
Wait, so a sphere is almost twice as bad at cutting through the air as a Honda Civic. How do you build an orbital spacecraft out of something with the aerodynamics of a brick?
You leverage a very counterintuitive fluid dynamics phenomenon known as the drag crisis.
The drag crisis. That sounds like a bad day at an aerodynamics lab.
It does, but it's actually a breakthrough. It all revolves around something called the Reynolds number.
Okay, I saw that term scattered all over the fluid dynamics reports in our sources, and I'll be honest, my eyes totally glazed over. Explain the Reynolds number to me like I'm 5.
Sure. Think of the Reynolds number as a ratio that tells you how the air is going to behave around an object. It compares the inertial forces, how fast the object is moving and how big it is, to the viscous forces, which is how sticky or thick the fluid is.
So wading through a pool of water versus wading through a pool of molasses.
Exactly. But air acts like a fluid too. When a sphere is moving slowly, the Reynolds number is low. The thin layer of air right next to the metal hull called the boundary layer flows very smoothly. This is laminar flow.
Oh, smooth sounds good. Smooth is fast, right?
You would think so, but smooth laminar flow doesn't have a lot of energy. It's easily pushed around. So as that smooth air travels around the curve of the sphere, it quickly loses momentum, detaches from the surface early, and creates that massive drag-inducing wake we just talked about.
Okay, so smooth air detaches early, bad wake, high drag. I'm following.
Right. But as the sphere accelerates to extreme speeds, the Reynolds number climbs. It crosses a critical threshold into a supercritical regime. When this happens, that smooth boundary layer of air suddenly turns turbulent. It becomes a chaotic, churning, highly energetic layer of air right against the hull.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me that making the air turbulent, which is the exact thing airline pilots try to avoid because it shakes the plane, actually helps the sphere? That makes 0 sense.
I know it sounds entirely backward, but consider this. Because that turbulent boundary layer is churning so violently, it is pulling high-energy air from further away and mixing it right down against the surface of the hull.
Oh.
That added energy allows the air to stick to the curved surface of the sphere for much longer.
Oh, I get it. So instead of peeling off at the equator, the air hugs the ball all the way to the back.
Precisely. The flow remains attached far longer. And because the air wraps further around the back of the sphere before it finally separates, the size of that low-pressure wake shrinks dramatically.
But so wake collapses.
Yes. The drag crisis is the moment the wake collapses. When that happens, the drag coefficient plummets from 0.47 down to roughly 0.10.
That is an 80% drop in drag, just by going faster. That is incredible. So the sphere essentially unlocks a cheat code in the physics engine. Once it goes fast enough, the air turbulence forms a sort of invisible aerodynamic teardrop shape around the ball.
That is a perfect way to visualize it. Because the SEVCO sphere is so large, the size of a massive RV, and moves so fast, it spends almost its entire flight profile operating in this supercritical, low-drag sweet spot.
Wow.
But the story doesn't end there, because getting to orbit means breaking the sound barrier.
Mach 1, the transonic regime. Now, I know a little bit of space history. The very first human in space, the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin, flew in a spherical capsule called Vostok. And when he re-entered the atmosphere, the reports say he experienced incredibly violent buffeting. He was getting thrown around like a rag doll.
He was, yeah.
If this SEVCO sphere is supposed to be a luxury lounge, how do they avoid shaking the martini glasses off the bar when they hit Mach 1?
Well, Gagarin's rough ride was due to the specific nightmare that is transonic fluid dynamics. As you approach the speed of sound between Mach 0.8 and Mach 1.2, the air doesn't behave uniformly. Shock waves begin to randomly form and collapse on the surface of the hull.
That sounds violently unpredictable.
It is. This causes the wake behind the sphere to violently oscillate back and forth.
So the low pressure zone is rapidly shifting left, right, up, down. No wonder Gagarin was bouncing around.
Exactly. Gagarin was in a passive capsule just falling back to Earth, completely at the mercy of those oscillations. However, modern direct numerical simulations, which are incredibly advanced supercomputer models of fluid flow, reveal something fascinating about the sphere.
What do the models show?
They show that the chaos is temporary. Once you push completely through the sound barrier and reach true supersonic flight, past Mach 1.2, a massive permanent bow shock forms entirely in front of the vehicle.
Like the wake in front of a speedboat cutting through a lake.
Exactly like that. That bow shock creates a massive high-pressure compression zone that acts like an invisible shield. The chaotic wake oscillations behind the sphere completely disappear. The wake stabilizes into a perfectly steady, symmetrical ring.
Wow. So going even faster makes the ride perfectly smooth.
Yes. The SEVCO sphere's flight profile is designed to punch through that bumpy transonic window, that Mach 1 transition, as rapidly as possible using intense acceleration. Once it is safely in the supersonic regime, the aerodynamics lock into place and the ride becomes smooth.
Okay, so the physics say a sphere can technically fly. But how are they actually manufacturing this thing? I mean, you can't just take a giant 3-inch thick sheet of aerospace-grade titanium and casually wrap it around a beach ball.
No, you definitely can't. Manufacturing a perfect pressure vessel is historically one of the hardest parts of aerospace engineering. Traditional rockets are cylinders because it is relatively easy to take a flat sheet of metal, roll it through a massive press to make a tube, and weld the single seam down the side.
Right, a tube is easy.
But a tube is not structurally optimal. When you pressurize a cylinder, filling it with breathable air for the crew, the pressure pushes outward. A cylinder has weak points where the walls meet the flat caps on the ends. Those corners experience massive stress concentration.
Because the pressure wants to pop the ends off.
Exactly. A sphere, however, is the mathematically perfect shape for a pressure vessel.
Because there are no corners. Every square inch of the hull takes the exact same amount of outward force.
Exactly right. But as you noted, you can't easily bend metal into a sphere without creating dozens of complex curved seams that are inherently weak and prone to microfractures.
So what's the workaround?
To solve this, SEVCO is using a manufacturing process outlined in their blueprints called integral hydro bulge forming, or IHBF.
Okay, I read the PRD on this IHBF process, and I had to read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Tell me if I have this right. They basically build a giant metal soccer ball, and then they blow it up with water.
You're not hallucinating. That is precisely what they do.
How does that even work?
Well, they begin by fabricating 32 completely flat metal plates. These plates are cut into specific geometric shapes, mostly hexagons and pentagons. They weld these flat plates together along straight lines to form a polyhedron.
Right, a truncated icosahedron, a literal giant metal soccer ball with hard angles and straight flat sides.
Yes, and the crucial detail here is that welding along a straight line is a highly predictable, easily verifiable process. You can ensure the weld is perfect.
Oh, because curved welds are a nightmare to get right.
Exactly. Once this angular box is sealed, they hook it up to massive industrial pumps and begin injecting it with water under immense hydraulic pressure.
And water doesn't compress, so as you pump more in, the pressure just builds and builds.
Until the metal itself begins to yield. The hydraulic pressure forces the flat plates to bow outward. The metal physically stretches until that angular polyhedron bulges into a near-perfect sphere.
But wait a second. If you take a rubber balloon and blow it up, the rubber gets thinner and weaker the more it stretches. Wouldn't stretching the metal of a spacecraft hull make it dangerously thin and fragile?
That is the intuitive assumption, yeah. But metallurgy works differently than rubber. The process actually makes the hull significantly stronger through a phenomenon called work hardening.
Work hardening, like folding a paperclip back and forth until it snaps?
Similar concept, but controlled. When the metal yields under the immense uniform pressure of the water, the microscopic crystalline structure inside the alloy is forced to realign. Okay. This plastic deformation locks the crystals into a tighter, more rigid matrix. The hull actually becomes vastly more resistant to crushing or buckling forces than it would be if you had just cast or rolled the metal into a curved shape initially.
That is absolutely brilliant. You get the mathematically perfect shape, you get the easiest possible welding process, and the act of forming the sphere actually makes the metal stronger.
Plus, water naturally wants to form a perfect sphere under pressure, right?
Yes. The physics of the fluid pressure ensures the final shape is perfectly symmetrical down to the millimeter.
Which is absolutely vital, because if your sphere is even slightly lopsided when you hit Mach 5, that aerodynamic push-out we talked about earlier will be asymmetrical, and the vehicle will literally tear itself apart.
Okay, so we have a perfectly symmetrical, work-hardened aerodynamic bowling ball. Now we just need to push it into orbit. The sources detail a dual-mode propulsion system, but the crown jewel, one of the 8 core technologies of the SEVCO Sphere, is something called the Aura drive. Let's break that down.
To understand the Aura drive, we first have to look at the first half of the dual-mode system. If you want to achieve Phase 2 taking off from a neighborhood vertiport or a driveway, you absolutely cannot light a massive chemical rocket.
Yeah.
You would incinerate the neighborhood.
Yeah, the HOA is definitely going to complain if you melt the cul-de-sac.
So for the very first stage of the flight, lifting off the ground and gaining initial altitude, the sphere utilizes distributed electric propulsion, or DEP.
Like a drone.
Very much like a drone, but scaled up to industrial capacities. Imagine an array of highly redundant electric rotors. But crucially, these rotors are not sticking out on arms like a consumer drone. They are housed entirely inside the vehicle's outer exoskeleton.
That's smart. If a rotor blade snaps, or if you accidentally fly near a tree or a power line, the blades are protected inside the cage of the hull.
It provides a massive safety margin. The DEP system allows the heavy vehicle to lift off vertically with a high degree of precision and minimal noise. It climbs through the thick lower atmosphere, but electric rotors rely on pushing air to generate lift.
Right, and once you get high enough, the atmosphere becomes too thin for the blades to bite into.
And that is when you ignite the rockets, the Aura drive.
Exactly. But the Aura drive is not a traditional rocket engine, is it? The documents describe it as an algorithmic aerospike.
Let's pause here, because aerospikes are sort of the holy grail of rocket science, and they are fascinating.
I agree. Let's look at a traditional rocket engine, like the ones on the Apollo Saturn V or a SpaceX Falcon 9. The bottom of the engine looks like a giant metal bell. Why is it shaped like a bell?
Well, that bell shape is a physical nozzle. When the rocket fuel burns in the combustion chamber, it creates incredibly hot, high-pressure gas. The job of the nozzle is to direct that expanding gas downward to create thrust. The shape of the bell controls exactly how the gas expands.
But there is a fatal flaw with bell nozzles, right? I remember reading that they are only efficient at one specific altitude.
That is the core limitation of traditional rocketry, yes. A bell nozzle has a fixed, rigid geometry made of metal. But the atmospheric pressure outside the rocket is constantly changing as it flies higher.
Because the air gets thinner.
Right. At sea level, the thick air pushes in against the exhaust. In the vacuum of space, there is no air, so the exhaust wants to violently expand outward in all directions.
So if you design a bell that works perfectly on the launch pad, once you get to space, the exhaust gas expands too widely outside the bell, and you lose all that energy pushing outward instead of pushing you forward.
Exactly. And conversely, if you design a massive bell optimized for the vacuum of space, at sea level, the thick atmosphere will crush the exhaust plume, causing flow separation that can literally vibrate the engine to pieces.
So aerospace engineers have to compromise. They design a bell that is okay at sea level, okay in the upper atmosphere, but never perfectly efficient at any one point.
Enter the Aerospike.
Yes. How does the Aura drive solve the bell problem?
An Aerospike essentially turns the bell inside out. Instead of firing the exhaust into a metal cone to constrain it, the Aura drive fires the exhaust along the outside of a central downward-pointing spike.
So there's no outer metal wall holding the fire in.
The outer wall is invisible. The Aerospike uses the ambient air pressure of the Earth's atmosphere itself to act as the virtual nozzle.
Whoa.
Think about it. At low altitudes, the thick atmospheric pressure pushes against the outside of the exhaust plume, keeping it tight against the central spike.
Oh, I see.
As the sphere climbs higher and the air pressure drops, that invisible wall of air naturally relaxes. The exhaust plume expands outward, perfectly, and I mean perfectly matched to the exact atmospheric pressure at every single millisecond of the ascent.
It's an engine that dynamically rebuilds its own shape using the atmosphere.
Yeah,
That is wild.
exactly. The result is a staggering 15% increase in fuel efficiency across the entire flight profile compared to traditional Bell engines. And in the brutal math of rocket equations, 15% is the difference between needing a massive multi-stage booster rocket that drops pieces into the ocean and being able to build a single stage-to-orbit vehicle.
And the Aura drive is specifically a toroidal aerospike, right? Meaning it's shaped like a ring around the bottom of the sphere rather than just one spike in the middle. The thrust pushes evenly around the entire base.
It provides incredibly balanced thrust, pushing the sphere straight up from its center of gravity.
Okay, I'm following you. We have a perfectly smooth, super strong sphere. It takes off with electric fans, then ignites a ring of fire that perfectly adapts to the atmosphere to blast into orbit.
Right.
But here's where my brain completely short circuits. If you have a perfectly round ball flying through the air at hypersonic speeds, and it doesn't have wings, it doesn't have flaps, it doesn't have tail fins, how on earth do you steer it?
It's a great question.
I mean, if I throw a baseball, I can't make it turn left halfway to the plate.
This is perhaps the most radical innovation in the entire SEVCO architecture. It brings us to their guidance, navigation, and control systems, specifically a technology they call inertia glide.
Inertia glide, let's dig into that.
To understand how a wingless sphere steers, we have to peel back the layers of the vehicle.
Yeah.
The sphere utilizes what the PRD calls a triple-tier concentric architecture.
Let's peel the onion. What are the three layers?
It is essentially three nested spheres, entirely separated from one another. The outermost layer is the integrated exoskeleton. This is the work-hardened hull we discussed. It takes the aerodynamic heat, houses the VTOL drone rotors, and provides the brute structural integrity.
Okay, that's the shell. Skip to the middle layer.
The middle layer is called the omnidirectional mass ring. This is the engine of inertia glide. Inertia glide is a moving mass trim control system, or MMTC.
Moving mass, so they steer by shifting weight around inside the ship.
That is the entire concept. Think about the heaviest components of a spacecraft. The massive battery banks for the electric rotors, the heavy life support machinery, the massive tanks of drinking water.
In a traditional rocket, these are bolted down rigidly, right?
Exactly. But in the SEVCO sphere, all of this heavy equipment is mounted on a complex series of motorized rails within this middle ring.
Oh, it's like a giant high-tech hamster ball.
A hamster ball.
Yeah. If you put a hamster inside a plastic ball and the hamster runs up the left side, its weight shifts the center of gravity and the ball rolls left.
The physics are identical, just apply to atmospheric flight. The flight computer uses high-torque motors to furiously slide these massive batteries and water tanks along the rails. By physically moving tons of mass away from the geometric center of the ship, the computer dynamically offsets the vehicle's center of mass.
And how does changing the center of mass allow it to steer in the air?
Well, in flight, there are two crucial points of balance. The center of mass, where the weight is concentrated, and the center of aerodynamic pressure, where the wind resistance is pushing against the hull. If you shift the center of mass away from the center of pressure, the aerodynamic forces cause the sphere to tilt.
Oh, it angles into the wind.
Yes, it creates an angle of attack. Even a blunt body, like a sphere, when tilted relative to the oncoming supersonic airflow, will deflect air downward. And Newton's third law dictates that if you deflect air downward, the air pushes you upward.
So you turn a falling bowling ball into a lifting body just by sliding batteries around inside. That is so cool.
Precisely. Now, earlier you mentioned Yuri Gagarin and the Vostok capsule. Vostok also utilized an offset center of gravity to survive re-entry. The Soviet engineers packed all the heavy equipment on one side of the sphere.
So it would naturally fall heavy side down like a weighted pair of dice.
Yes, it oriented the heat shield forward automatically. But because the mass was fixed and bolted in place, they couldn't change the angle, it couldn't steer. It was a purely ballistic trajectory.
You just fell like a rock.
Exactly, which is why Gagarin experienced a bone-crushing 8 to 9 Gs of deceleration force. The air slammed into the capsule and violently stopped it.
That's fine if you're a military test pilot with a heart of steel. But if you're a family of 4 on a luxury vacation, Pulling 9Gs is going to cause severe injuries, if not fatal ones.
Which is why inertia glide is mandatory for the commercial model, because the SEVCO sphere can actively move its internal mass in milliseconds. It can constantly adjust its angle of attack. It can modulate its lift-to-drag ratio in real time.
So instead of slamming into the atmosphere like a belly flop, it can tilt, generate lift, and sort of skip off the upper atmosphere like a stone on a pond.
Exactly. It surfs the atmosphere. It gradually bleeds off speed, banking left and right by rolling the vehicle using small reaction control system thrusters, aiming its lift vector to steer toward a precise vertiport landing pad.
And what does that do to the G-forces?
Because it's gliding rather than falling, the deceleration forces are stretched out over a longer period, keeping the G-forces down to a very comfortable 4 to 6 Gs.
That is just brilliant engineering, because if you steer from the inside, you completely eliminate the need for wings, flaps, or ailerons. And during the searing 3,000-degree plasma heat of atmospheric reentry, wings are the most dangerous, fragile parts of a spaceship. If you don't have wings, they can't burn off.
The simplicity of the exterior is its greatest strength. However, this raises an incredibly complex problem. Moving heavy masses around inside a flying sphere creates chaotic inertial rolling interactions.
Wait, what do you mean?
Think about the conservation of angular momentum. If the flight computer suddenly shoves a 2-ton water tank along a curved rail to pitch the nose up, the equal and opposite reaction is going to induce an unwanted roll in the outer hull.
Oh, right, like an unbalanced washing machine on the spin cycle. The whole ship would start wobbling and tumbling out of control.
It would be mathematically chaotic. To prevent the ship from shaking itself apart, inertia glide relies on a piece of software called the L1 Adaptive Control Layer.
A digital stabilizer.
The most advanced one ever conceived. The L1 software runs millions of calculations a second. It doesn't just react to the wobbles, it anticipates the nonlinear dynamics. Before it even moves a battery bank, it calculates the exact counterthrust needed from the reaction control jets to cancel out the wobble.
So it fixes the wobble before it even happens.
Exactly. The UX architecture documents boast that this software actively suppresses 72% of all mechanical vibrations, ensuring the trajectory changes are what they term Apple smooth.
Okay, I have to stop and paint this picture because it is terrifying and magnificent. The outer exoskeleton is blazing through the atmosphere at Mach 5, engulfed in superheated plasma.
Yes.
The middle ring is furiously sliding tons of water and batteries around on motorized rails to surf the airwaves. The reaction jets are firing microbursts to cancel out the washing machine wobble. The whole vehicle is pitching and rolling to generate lift.
All happening simultaneously, yes.
If all of that chaos is happening in the outer layers, what is happening to the family sitting in the lounge? Are they just tumbling head over heels, spilling their drinks?
Not at all. And this is where we finally reach the innermost tier of the architecture, the gimbaled habitability cocoon. This is the heart of the cocoon living user experience.
Tell me about the cocoon.
The inner sphere, the luxury lounge where the passengers actually are, is completely mechanically isolated from the chaos of the outer layers. It is suspended in the center of the vehicle on a frictionless, multi-axis gimbal.
Like a massive gyroscope.
Precisely. No matter how violently the outer exoskeleton pitches, yaws, or rolls to surf the atmosphere, the inner cocoon remains entirely level relative to the gravity vector, or during acceleration, relative to the thrust vector.
So if the outer ship tilts 45 degrees to bank toward the landing pad, the inner room just freely rotates the opposite direction, so the floor stays perfectly flat.
The passengers always feel exactly upright. They might feel the weight of the G-forces pressing them into their seats, but they will never feel like they're hanging upside down or tumbling.
That is the ultimate luxury. It completely severs the passenger experience from the brutal physics of aerospace flight dynamics.
It is a complete paradigm shift in human-machine interfacing. And it brings us to the Radial Vision UX Architecture Report. The explicit goal of SEVCO's interior design is to merge the design-centric luxury of Apple with the technical audacity of SpaceX.
I love that.
They are abandoning the traditional concept of horizontal floors and ceilings. The interior is a 360-degree radial lounge.
Right, because in zero gravity, there is no up or down. A flat floor is a waste of space.
Exactly. The furniture is modular and floating. Every surface is covered in massive acoustic dampening materials, so you don't hear the hum of the life support pumps or the roar of the thrusters. It shouldn't sound like you were inside a rattling tin can. It should sound like a high-end recording studio.
So quiet.
But the centerpiece of the UX is the visual experience.
Because if you drop $1 million to go to space, you want to look out the window.
And they provide an unmatched view. The Sphere features a 16-window array built directly into the structural framework of the outer hull. When the gimbaled inner cabin aligns its viewing ports with these outer structural windows, passengers have access to what SEVCO claims will be the largest windows ever flown to space.
I read they use specialized high-performance composites and anti-reflective coatings, so there's no glare from the cabin lights ruining your photo of the Earth.
Exactly.
But wait, if there are massive panoramic windows everywhere, where are the pilot's controls? Do they just plaster the glass with hundreds of physical dials, altimeters, and switches?
That would entirely ruin the aesthetic, and it would overwhelm a non-professional pilot. They solved this with a system called the Digital Visor HUD.
Visor. That's a Russian word, right?
Yes, it is. Historically, Yuri Gagarin used a mechanical optical periscope called a visor. It allowed him to look through the hull, see the horizon, and manually align his capsule using a grid on a piece of glass.
Oh, wow.
SEVCO has taken that concept and modernized it into a high-fidelity, augmented reality head-up display.
So they're projecting the spaceship's dashboard directly onto the glass window, like Tony Stark's helmet.
Exactly. The digital visor projects virtual horizon lines, orbital trajectories, speed, and stability metrics as soft-glow holographic elements over the real-world view. It entirely abandons the cluttered utilitarian dashboards of old Apollo modules. It's a clean, minimalist user interface.
But how does a civilian pilot know how to land a flying sphere on a driveway? I mean, that sounds incredibly hard.
The AR system guides them. During a vertical landing, the HUD literally projects virtual landing gates in the air outside the window, like something out of a flight simulator video game.
No way.
Yes. It takes the complex telemetry from the VTOL drone rotors and translates it into a simple visual flight corridor. You just fly the ship through the glowing augmented reality hoops to touchdown safely.
That is incredibly cool. It gamifies the hardest part of flying. But there is another aspect to this radial vision system that absolutely blew my mind when I read the PRD. It's called the synthetic window system, or SWS.
Oh, yeah.
Because obviously you can't have glass covering the entire hull. There are parts of the ship covered by the Aerospike engine, the mass rings, the life support tanks. But the goal of the UX is to make the passengers feel like they're flying inside a completely transparent, magical bubble.
And they achieve that illusion through screen technology. When the inner gimbaled cabin rotates away from the physical glass ports, the interior walls of the cocoon aren't just blank metal. They are covered seamlessly in 8K HDR OLED panels.
Like a massive curved television wrapping the room.
Yes, and these panels use exterior hull-mounted camera feeds to simulate the exact view the passengers would see if the metal hull were totally transparent. But it's not just a flat video feed. The system incorporates highly sensitive eye-tracking cameras inside the cabin.
Wait, why do they need to track your eyes?
For parallax.
Yeah.
If you look out a real window and move your head to the left, the angle of what you see outside changes. A flat TV screen doesn't do that, which instantly breaks the illusion and causes motion sickness.
Oh, your brain knows it's fake.
Right. The SWS tracks your head movements and dynamically adjusts the digital projection in real time. As you lean forward, the digital view shifts perfectly.
So it tricks your brain into believing the wall isn't there.
Exactly. It perfectly aligns your visual horizon with what your inner ear is feeling on the gimbal, which virtually eliminates the nausea associated with space sickness.
It's essentially a cloaking device, but you're looking from the inside out. But let me ask you this. There is a psychological catch here. Being in deep space, millions of miles from Earth, and staring out into an infinite, completely black, utterly silent void, that can actually be terrifying.
It can be paralyzing.
The overview effect of seeing the Earth is beautiful, but staring into the abyss for a 2-month trip to Mars could cause severe sensory deprivation, claustrophobia, and panic attacks.
You've identified a very real psychological hazard for Phase 3 deep space missions. The human brain evolved to process changing landscapes, sunlight, weather. It is not wired to process an endless black void for weeks on end. That is precisely why the synthetic window system includes a crucial feature, the dim-to-black safety valve.
I love this concept because if the vastness of space starts inducing an existential crisis, you don't just pull a plastic airplane shade down over the window.
No, the system recognizes the stress, or you can trigger it manually. The OLED walls instantly transition from the terrifying cosmic view to a fully immersive, high-definition biophilic nature projection.
Biophilic, meaning nature-loving.
Yes. The walls can project a lush, dense terrestrial forest, or a calm tropical ocean scene, or a mountain range. It provides a familiar, Earth-like emotional anchor to calm the nervous system.
You essentially turn your spaceship into a cozy forest cabin on demand.
Coupled with this is a circadian rhythm management system. In deep space, there is no sunrise or sunset. Your sleep cycle would completely disintegrate. The mood-responsive lighting inside the cocoon works in tandem with the virtual windows to artificially simulate Earth's natural 24-hour light cycle.
Oh, that is so smart.
It slowly brightens with blue light in the morning and dims to warm ambers at night, ensuring the passenger's biology remains synchronized to Earth time.
It is an anxiety-canceling room. It's fascinating how much engineering went into just keeping the humans sane. But look, luxury lounges, floating chairs, and AR windows are fantastic. But space is fundamentally hostile.
Very true.
It doesn't care if you're comfortable. It wants to kill you. It is a vacuum devoid of oxygen, and it is saturated with deadly radiation. If we're taking a family road trip to Mars, how do they handle the raw survival elements? Air, water, and cosmic rays.
This is where we transition from the psychology of aesthetics to the absolute life-or-death bedrock of aerospace engineering. The SEVCO SPHERE addresses survival with two massive technological pillars: Gaia Breath for environmental life support and Halo Guard for radiation shielding.
Let's start with breathing, Gaia Breath. This is their regenerative environmental control and life support system, or ECLSS.
Right.
Now, I know the International Space Station has an ECLSS that recycles air and water, but my understanding from reading the engineering roadmaps is that the SEVCO system isn't just copying the ISS, they are trying to radically improve it to completely eliminate maintenance.
The ISS system is a marvel of human achievement, but it's based on older, fundamentally limited chemistry. Let's look at how the ISS recycles air. When astronauts exhale carbon dioxide, the ISS captures it and runs it through a Sabatier reactor.
Okay, I am not a chemist. What does a Sabatier reactor actually do?
It takes the carbon dioxide, the crew exhales, mixes it with hydrogen gas, and heats it up over a catalyst. The chemical reaction produces two things: water, which is great, and methane gas.
Okay, so you get water back, but where is the oxygen for them to breathe?
They take the water produced by the Sabatier reactor and run electricity through it in a process called electrolysis. This splits the H2O into hydrogen and oxygen. The astronauts breathe the oxygen, and the hydrogen gets fed back into the Sabatier reactor to process more CO2.
That sounds like a perfect closed loop. What's the problem?
The problem is the math. The Sabatier process only recovers about 54% of the oxygen atoms trapped in the original carbon dioxide. The remaining oxygen is lost, permanently bound up in the waste methane gas, which is vented overboard into space.
Oh, so every time they take a breath, they are permanently losing almost half of their oxygen supply out the tailpipe.
Exactly. Which means they constantly need cargo ships like the SpaceX Dragon flying up to the ISS to deliver fresh tanks of water and oxygen to make up the difference.
The ISS is entirely dependent on an umbilical cord to Earth.
Right. But if you are in a SEVCO SPHERE halfway to Mars, there is no Amazon Prime delivery for oxygen. A 54% recovery rate is a death sentence on a long mission.
So what is the alternative to the Sabatier reactor? How does Gaia Breath fix the math?
Gaia Breath utilizes a different chemical pathway called the Bosch process. The Bosch system is much harder to engineer because it requires much higher temperatures, but the payoff is massive. It reacts the exhaled CO2 with hydrogen, but instead of making methane, it produces water and solid carbon.
Solid carbon, like graphite or soot.
Yes, it literally pulls the carbon out as a solid dust. Because it doesn't create methane, the Bosch system achieves greater than 90% oxygen loop closure. You are recovering almost all of your breathable air. You virtually eliminate the need for massive, heavy tanks of resupply oxygen.
That is incredible. You just empty out a dust trap of solid carbon every few weeks. But what about water? A family of 4 goes through a staggering amount of water for drinking, cooking, washing their hands, flushing the toilet. You can't bring a swimming pool with you.
The Sphere uses a proprietary water management membrane, or WAM, combined with a highly advanced Paragon urine processor. This system pushes total water recovery to an astonishing 96 to 98%.
Wow.
It captures moisture from your breath, your sweat, the shower drain, and yes, the toilet, and purifies it back to crystal clear, medical-grade drinking water.
Which is the old astronaut joke. Today's coffee is tomorrow's coffee.
Very true.
But the YMM technology stood out to me because the documents explicitly note it operates without complex mechanical pumps.
That is a critical innovation. Mechanical pumps have moving parts. Moving parts break. On the ISS, astronauts spend an inordinate amount of their week doing plumbing repair. You don't want to be elbow deep in a broken zero-gravity toilet while you're on a luxury vacation.
No, thank you.
The WAM relies on passive ionomer membranes, essentially microscopic chemical filters, that pull the water through using osmotic pressure rather than physical pumps. It gives the system a maintenance-free lifetime of over 150,000 hours.
Passive recycling. It just works in the background. But as I was reading the PRD, the absolute smartest piece of engineering was the synergy between these systems. Because the documents mention that if they do use a modified Sabatier reactor that produces waste methane, they don't vent it overboard, they integrate it with the engines.
This is where aerospace engineering becomes art. If we connect the life support to the bigger picture of the propulsion system, we look back at the Aura Drive. The Aura Drive Aerospike is a methalox engine. It burns liquid methane and liquid oxygen.
Wait a second. So the waste gas from the passengers breathing is the exact same chemical fuel the rocket uses?
Exactly. The waste methane generated by the life support reactors can be plumbed directly into the ship's reaction control system, the small thrusters that roll and steer the sphere during inertia glide.
I am mind blown. It's the ultimate closed-loop ecosystem. The passenger's own exhaled breath literally helps fuel the rockets that steer the ship. It is the ultimate leave-no-trace camping trip. The ship keeps you alive, and your waste keeps the ship flying.
It is profound efficiency. But air and water are only half the survival equation. We have to discuss the invisible killer, cosmic radiation.
Right. Down here on Earth, we have a massive magnetic field and miles of thick atmosphere protecting us from the sun's solar flares and deep space cosmic rays. Once you leave low Earth orbit, you are getting bombarded by high-energy atomic particles moving at nearly the speed of light.
It's a brutal environment.
Now, my intuition tells me that to stop a cosmic ray, you just build the walls of the spaceship out of thick, heavy metal, like wearing a lead apron at the dentist.
Your intuition is what engineers thought in the 1960s, and it turns out to be disastrously wrong. In deep space, wrapping a ship in thick metal like aluminum or lead can actually make the radiation worse.
How is that possible? The thick wall stops things.
Consider this metaphor. Imagine you have a thick wall made of glass flecks, and someone fires a high-caliber sniper rifle at it.
Okay.
The bullet hits the wall. The wall might stop the bullet from going all the way through, but the kinetic energy of that impact shatters the glass bricks, and a spray of jagged glass shrapnel blasts into the room on the other side.
Oh, and the shrapnel covers a wider area and causes more damage than the single bullet would have.
That is exactly what happens with cosmic radiation. A high-energy, heavy ion, the bullet, slams into the dense aluminum atoms of the hull. The ion rapidly decelerates, but that violent impact shatters the atomic structure, causing the metal itself to emit a shower of dangerous secondary neutrons. This process is known as Bremsstrahlung, or breaking radiation.
So the metal wall literally becomes a secondary radiation weapon against the crew.
Yes. The secondary radiation showering the cabin is often more biologically damaging to human DNA than the original cosmic ray would have been if it had just passed cleanly through the ship.
So if thick metal is a terrible idea, how does SEVCO's Halo Guard system protect the passengers without turning the hull into a shrapnel grenade?
Halo Guard relies on advanced nanomaterials, specifically something called boron nitride nanotubes, or BNNTs, which are integrated into a hydrogenous epoxy matrix.
Okay, we need to translate that. What is a BNNT and what is a hydrogenous epoxy matrix?
Let's start with the epoxy. Think of the epoxy matrix as a microscopic sponge. But instead of soaking up water, this material is incredibly rich in hydrogen atoms.
Okay.
Hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe. A cosmic ray hitting hydrogen is like shooting a bullet into a massive pile of loose sand.
The sand absorbs the energy smoothly. It doesn't shatter into shrapnel.
Exactly. The hydrogen acts as a perfect moderator, slowing down the heavy ions gently without triggering that dangerous secondary Bremsstrahlung radiation.
And what about the BNNTs?
The boron nitride nanotubes are a structural reinforcement mixed into that epoxy. BNNTs are incredibly strong, lightweight fibers. But chemically, boron is exceptionally good at absorbing the slow-moving thermal neutrons that do manage to get created.
So the hydrogen slows the bullet down and the boron catches the tiny fragments.
The combination is roughly 15% more efficient at blocking radiation than aluminum, while weighing significantly less. But Halo Guard goes one step further, utilizing a brilliantly practical concept called water walls.
Water walls.
As we discussed, water is H2O. It is essentially dense liquid hydrogen. It is one of the best radiation shields in the universe.
Oh, wow.
The SEVCO Sphere does not store its heavy drinking water in a centralized tank. Instead, it stores its entire potable and regenerative water supply within specialized, compartmentalized bladders built directly into the perimeter of the hull structure.
So the physical walls of the lounge are filled with a thick layer of drinking water.
Yes, a wall of water entirely surrounds the inner cocoon, acting as a massive biological field.
I just, the elegance of that. You drink the wall that is protecting you from radiation, you sweat it out, the WAM purifies it, puts it back in the wall to protect you again, and your exhaled breath steers the ship. The level of integration is just staggering.
It is a closed loop of survival, but taking a step back from the brilliant physics and chemistry, we have to look at reality.
Right.
Not flying nuclear reactor-powered, actively steering space sphere that launches from a neighborhood sounds like a regulatory nightmare. You can't just build this in your garage and press launch.
What does the government have to say about this? I can't imagine the FAA is thrilled about the idea of massive metal spheres blasting off from a suburban cul-de-sac.
The regulatory hurdles outlined in the sources are arguably as complex as the fluid dynamics. To make this a commercial reality, SEVCO has to successfully navigate the FAA's Part 450 regulations.
Part 450, what is that?
It is the relatively new federal framework specifically designed for commercial launch and reentry vehicles. Historically, space regulation was prescriptive. The government told you exactly what kind of bolts to use. Part 450 is a performance-based licensing path.
Meaning what?
This means the FAA doesn't tell SEVCO how to build the sphere. They just say, you have to mathematically, definitively prove to us that your vehicle will not kill anyone on the ground.
Safe for the uninvolved public.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The absolute core of securing a Part 450 license is passing the expected casualty analysis. SEVCO has to submit supercomputer simulations, proving that the risk of a casualty to the public during any phase of launch or reentry is below a strict threshold of 1 in 10,000.
1 in 10,000. That sounds high, but I guess when you're dealing with millions of pounds of explosive thrust, it makes sense. But how do you ever prove that if your business model is launching from a neighborhood vertiport?
The truth is, for the initial deployments, you don't. Phase 2 autonomy does not start in a neighborhood. The roadmap outlines a transitional strategy called the mobile spaceport.
Mobile spaceport, like an aircraft carrier for spaceships.
More like a heavily modified sea barge. Because the SEVCO Sphere utilizes vertical takeoff and landing VTOL capabilities, it doesn't need a 3-mile-long concrete runway like the Space Shuttle. It doesn't even need a massive launch tower like a SpaceX Falcon. It just needs a flat, sturdy pad.
Oh, so it's like SpaceX catching the returning booster rockets on those drone ships out in the ocean, but in reverse. You load the sphere onto a boat, tow it hundreds of miles out into international waters, and launch from there.
Precisely. Launching from the middle of the ocean completely mitigates the public risk of the expected casualty analysis. There's no one around to hurt. It also completely solves the noise pollution problem.
Because even if the electric VTL drones are quiet, when that Aura Drive Aerospike ignites to push for orbit, it is going to shatter windows for miles.
Exactly. The ocean launch allows them to build a flight heritage. They can prove to the FAA over hundreds of flights that the sphere is safe. And mathematically, the sphere is inherently much safer than a traditional rocket.
Why is that?
It has those VTOL electric rotors that can safely land the craft if the main engine fails. It uses liquid fuels that can be throttled down or shut off instantly, unlike solid rocket boosters. And it utilizes that inertia glide lifting reentry to glide to a stop rather than falling purely ballistically.
And if you can prove it's safer, that changes the financial reality too, right?
Dramatically. It changes the insurance calculus. In commercial spaceflight, a lower risk profile means a lower maximum probable loss calculation by the underwriters. That translates directly into vastly lower insurance premiums per flight.
Which is huge for the bottom line.
Exactly. That financial viability is the invisible engine that makes mass market space tourism possible. If you can't assure it cheaply, you can't fly it commercially.
In addition to the FAA, they have to deal with the FCC for the massive amounts of high-speed radio telemetry and the Department of Commerce, right?
Yes, specifically the Export Administration regulations. Because a flying autonomous sphere that can re-enter the atmosphere precisely on target is considered dual-use technology.
Dual use, meaning it could be a luxury RV or it could be a hypersonic missile.
Exactly. The government strictly controls who you can sell that technology to internationally. So the legal engineering is as daunting as the physical engineering.
Okay, so we've mapped the market, we've solved the drag crisis, we've built the engine, balanced the steering, designed the luxury interior, recycled the air and water, and somehow convinced the FAA to let us fly. Let's look at the absolute endgame, Phase 3. The deep space vision.
This is the best part.
The sources talk about a concept called the fractal space station. What on earth is a fractal space station?
To understand the fractal space station, you have to remember that a sphere is the most volume-efficient shape in geometry. It holds the most interior space for the least amount of surface area. Now imagine if SEVCO standardizes the docking ports on the outside of every single sphere they manufacture.
Standardized ports, like the plugs on a Lego brick.
Exactly. You align these docking ports on the X, Y, and Z axis of the vehicle. If you do that, you can connect these vehicles together in orbit like massive Tinker toys. The long-term vision is a modular, ever-expanding conglomerate.
So instead of launching one giant space station, you just snap the individual family RVs together.
Right. A deep space mission might start relatively small. You take a central, slightly larger 8-meter sphere, which acts as the core life support hub. Then you fly up 2 standard 4-meter luxury spheres and dock them to the sides.
Okay, I can picture that.
Suddenly, you have a multi-room spacecraft capable of a 100-day mission to a near-Earth asteroid with distinct private living quarters and a shared communal hub.
It's literally like driving your RV to a specialized camper park, but in zero gravity. You plug into the grid and hang out with your neighbors.
And that scales up exponentially. The ultimate goal outlined in the roadmap is the construction of an 80-meter mother sphere.
80 meters. That is the size of a skyscraper, just round. You can't launch something that big from Earth.
You can't. The mother sphere would have to be manufactured directly in orbit. And they would likely use that same integral hydro bulge forming technique we discussed earlier.
Oh, they launch the flat plates and blow it up in space.
Yes. They would assemble the angular polyhedron in zero gravity, fill it with water, and pressurize it to stretch it into an 80-meter sphere right there in orbit.
That is mind-boggling.
Once completed, this mother sphere becomes a massive orbital hub. It could maintain highly specialized large-scale environments inside it, for example. It could hold high carbon dioxide atmospheres dedicated entirely to massive hydroponic farming to generate food.
While the smaller spheres just plug into the sides.
Exactly. Hundreds of smaller, privately owned SEVCO spheres can fly up from Earth and dock along the exterior. The mother sphere provides the food and the core utilities, while the individual dock spheres provide the Earth-normal, luxury living quarters for a massive human population.
It's a fractal expansion of humanity, a city made of bubbles. But here's the thought that keeps echoing in my head. Let's say Phase 3 never happens. Let's say we never build the 80-meter mother sphere.
Okay.
Even if SEVCO just stops at Phase 1 and 2, the sheer amount of technological innovation required just to make a sphere fly?
Yeah.
It has to have massive implications for us down here on Earth, right?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And this is the true beauty of aerospace innovation. The technology always bleeds back into terrestrial life.
Give me some examples.
Take the integral hydro bulge forming process. If we can use it to create mathematically perfect pressure holes for space, we can flip the math and use it to create deep-sea submersibles.
Wow, yeah.
We could manufacture hulls that are vastly lighter and stronger than anything we have today, completely revolutionizing oceanic exploration and deep-sea mining.
What about the radiation shielding?
The boron nitride nanotube and hydrogenous epoxy materials from the HaloGuard system are incredibly lightweight and efficient at stopping neutrons. That exact material could be adapted down here to build vastly safer, cheaper, and smaller containment vessels for next-generation nuclear reactors.
That could change the energy sector.
Or it could be used as an incredibly strong, fireproof structural material in commercial architecture.
And the life support, the Gaia breath system.
The closed-loop WAM water membranes that require no mechanical pumps. Imagine deploying those in remote, drought-stricken communities in the developing world. You could provide sustainable, maintenance-free water purification systems that don't require an electrical grid to power heavy pumps. The spin-offs are limitless.
Okay, let's unpack this entire journey because it has been intense. So what does this all mean? We started this deep dive by talking about the cramped, utilitarian, high-G rockets of the past, the agonizing endurance test of early spaceflight. What SEVCO is doing is taking the absolute oldest, most reliable shape in spaceflight history, the spherical design of Yuri Gagarin's Vostok capsule, and essentially infusing it with 21st century magic.
That's a great way to put it.
They are strapping algorithmic VTOL propulsion to it, using AI-driven mass control to steer it from the inside, and wrapping the whole thing in an Apple-tier luxury user experience to completely democratize space travel.
That is the essence of the project. It fundamentally shifts spaceflight from an extreme endurance test of human physiology into an enriching experience of human psychology. It removes the brutal physical barrier to entry.
Yeah.
It replaces brute force with aerodynamic elegance, moving mass physics, and perfect closed-loop sustainability.
It's moving from surviving to thriving. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the aerospace engineering of tomorrow. It has been an absolute trip unpacking the blueprints, the physics, and the sheer audacity of the SEVCO sphere.
Thanks for having me.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with one final thing to ponder. We've talked entirely about the machines today, but think about the people. If the SEVCO sphere succeeds, and the barrier to surviving in space is no longer peak physical fitness, a military background, and a willingness to pull 9Gs, if the only barrier is simply owning the right vehicle, how does that fundamentally change the culture of humanity as we expand into the stars? When anyone, a musician, an artist, a child, a grandparent, can go to space in their pajamas, what kind of society do we actually build out there in the great beyond?